as well. So with that, I will invite Aristotle Johns up here, who will introduce Sesshu Foster. Thank you. Oh, and turn off your cell phones if you haven't already.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, in the back? Wonderful. If you follow the East LA guide that was created by Sesshu Foster and his artistic collaborator and friend Arturo Romo, which you should absolutely check out online if you haven't at elaguide.org, you might end up at Homegirl Cafe eating chicken in pumpkin seed sauce, or maybe you'll be taking in the great artistry and sound of the Mariachi Plaza, or you'll arrive at, as the tour calls it if you're lucky, the ultimate muffler shop at the end of time. Inspired by the humanity and surprise of their work, I got to thinking about how I might give a tour of the corner of Salt Lake City that has held and kept me for the past 3-ish years. But it was hard to know, as with any labor of love and art, where I should start the tour. I thought I'd maybe walk you to the south side of 21st, and we could stand at the bus stop, and we'd stare across the road and then see a woman step ankle deep into a slab of fresh cement. Or I'd take you to La Pequeñita Market on State Street on a New Year's Eve so we could listen to the families as they debated the freshness of discounted pan dulce left over after the Christmas rush. Or I'd hold your hand and I'd wave it at the front windows of the Indian restaurant, and then I'd tell you to keep waving your hand at that glass every single day for a few years until one January the owner might come out and show you his lisp and his good eyes as he puts into your hands like a jewel a perfect and cold strawberry lassie. See, what Sesshu Foster's work seems to understand on a cellular level, and what tour guides like Baedeker and Rick Steves and Yelp seem to consistently ignore, is the fact that place is never truly place if it doesn't include two essential things: time and life. Sure, the Eiffel Tower is fine, but it's lifeless because it's wrenched from time. And when you're there, it overflows with people who are trying to forget that other people are there, and have been there, and will be there. But time and life is at the center of all of Sesshu Foster's work, as formally varied as it is. In this way, Sesshu Foster makes a most exemplary tour guide to us. Whether he offers a poetic and painfully human tour of the LA neighborhood where he grew up, as he does in his book City Terrace Field Manual, or whether it's a fragmentary and near aphoristic tour of a city of the future in his book by the same title, or even an enigmatic tour of the fictional air transit lines above LA, or even a tour of entire speculative worlds, as in his book Atomik Aztex, Foster never fails us as a bravest tour guide. But he's a trickstery one, a shape-shifting tour guide, one that code switches from beatnik to bard. In one moment he's deeply lyrical, and in another moment he's a gonzo journalist. At once his work sounds like a textbook or a newspaper clipping, and then all of a sudden he's satirizing the whole linear fallacy of American history. But he's not just piecing this all apart for tricks or for meaningless pomo fun, because he keeps people at the heart of it all. People that struggle and fight and search and protest and question and build and live. And these people live inside the whims of time, be it future time or past time or present time or dream time or what really is the difference anymore. Foster's guidance offers us new histories. He recovers things for us, memories, forgotten people, allied communities. He holds them and turns them and then returns them to us, and they are changed in our hands forever. He gives us the close-up and then the bird's eye view. He guides us on levels so much deeper than the street, and we go into the underground where the human roots grow. And then he takes us into the sky, where visions of new worlds can swim like fish. This makes it all the more meaningful that his collaboratively created novel, Elidat, centers on the dirigible, that Zeppelin-shaped mode of transportation that once symbolized the possibility of a more united and connected humanity, a dream that lived way up there. And from up there, I have the vantage to inform you that Sesshu Foster, poet, novelist, educator, is the author of 7 books, ranging in form and style, including his latest with Arturo Romo, L.A., which we have here for sale tonight. Foster earned an MFA at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he taught in high schools of East LA for 25 years, as well as at the California Institute of the Arts, Naropa University, and UC Santa Cruz. He still lives in Los Angeles. But I could also start the tour from down here, at ground level, where I can gesture and say that here is where Sesshu Foster once stood and spoke to us, and there is where you once sat and listened to him, and where you were very mystified and grateful. Please join me in welcoming Sesshu Foster.
Got it?
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, am I on? Am I on? Good, good. All right. Well, thanks to Michael and Sadie and Aristotle for hosting me here. Thanks to Ashley and Luisa for all the assistance in getting me up here and turning me on here. All right. Here we go. We're not on, huh? Now are we on? What's the matter? There we go. Good to go. Got to turn that off. All right. Okay. As a kind of introduction, I'm going to read an essay that's going to appear in the LA Times next month. Every year, the LA Times hosts a book festival, which is a great thing. Tens of thousands of people turn out to go to this festival of readings, book stalls by local bookstores and publishers, and they have a poetry stage, they have a cookbook stage, and they have panels in the auditoriums of famous crime fiction writers. Those are the ones that are packed. And whoever else is trending. So the LA Times asked me to write an essay. Ashley asked me what I was writing recently, and people have been asking me to write essays, so I've been doing that. But this one kind of serves as an introduction to my work. The slides that are going to be up here through the reading today, Arturo Romo composed them from his files, and I don't really know. I don't really know what they were. Many of the files, especially the ones that have animation or are video, obviously they were made in conjunction with the book, but obviously they don't fit the format of the book. So there's a kind of digital component of the book that perhaps appropriately just floats in the nebulous cyber cloud. Yeah, all right. Charles Bukowski, he stood on the staircase landing above us in the library of Cal State LA Student Union. Students crowded the floor. Bukowski growled and grumbled poems tersely, notes of a dirty old man. At that elevation, he looked like a haggard Balzac by Rodin. Between quips, he chug-a-lugged Michelobes as some enabler behind him pulled fresh bottles out of a bag and stowed the empties. That was the first poetry reading I'd ever attended in 1975. I thought Buke, or Hank, as his fans like to call him, was either nervous or playing to public persona. The six-pack or two he guzzled in 45 minutes didn't impress me, thanks to my own alcoholic dad. But I did respect Bukowski's poetry. His laconic verse, let's call it that, was embittered and world-weary, defiant or faux defiant, a perfectly potent analog to the city of strip malls and sun-blasted avenues, industrial zones and mean streets, the LA that Jack Kerouac called the loneliest and most brutal of cities. I grew up across the freeway from Cal State LA in City Terrace. So when a high school friend told me Bukowski was reading, I walked over. In high school, I spent my days filling notebook after notebook with drawings and writing. When a notebook was full, I threw it away and picked up another one. When an activist friend found out about this, he took a stack of notebooks to Ghidra, the Asian American movement newspaper in Little Tokyo, which first published my work. I wasn't the best student, but I read all the time, sometimes a book a day. I left home for good at 17. I hitchhiked back and forth to Northern California to see my younger brother. Paul had been kicked out of the house at 12 and lived in hippie communes or foster homes and sometimes on the street. Once, standing on Highway 1 south of Monterey, Paul handed me the classic City Lights pocketbook, Allen Ginsberg's Howl and Other Poems, which immediately detonated all my ideas of literature. Ginsberg's incantatory dithyrambs pulled the beats, Walt Whitman, and much of 20th century poetry into view. More than that, my brother's gift of poetry put me in touch with the whole West Coast counterculture our father was a part of, with his alcoholism and his Zen Buddhism, his haphazard poetry and painting during a life on the road. By the time I saw Bukowski read, I'd already read his poetry. It didn't hit me with the force of Howl, but I recognized the LA I grew up in. John Martin had founded Black Sparrow Press in the 1960s in order to publish Bukowski, and Bukowski's burgeoning international sales funded a whole catalog of avant-garde writers from John Fante to Dreiser and others. During hitchhiking trips to visit my dad, who often roomed in a Santa Barbara YMCA, we'd frequent bookstores together. That was how, in a used bookstore near the Santa Barbara Greyhound station, I came across Wanda Coleman's first Black Sparrow Press chapbook, 1977's Art in the Court of the Blue Fag. My dad, born and raised in the shipyard town of Vallejo, California, was a Signal Corps veteran who used his GI benefits to study painting with Mark Rothko, Clifford Still, and Richard Diebenkorn at the San Francisco Art Institute, which closed this year. He went to Saburo Hasegawa's lectures on Zen and the art of painting with the likes of Alan Watts and Gary Snyder. He drank red wine at beat poetry readings around San Francisco, and after having some 10 children with 3 wives, he lost all families to alcohol and the restless road. My relationship with my father was largely in writing, weekly letters, sometimes 4 or 5 from wherever he went in the world, detailing adventures and daily marvels. He also wrote to me of Cesar Vallejo and Henri Michaud, Chuang Tzu, and Kenneth Rexroth's translations from the Chinese and Japanese, often starting each letter with quotations. Years later in college, I was trying to write my first book, wearing out manual typewriters I bought at yard sales for $20, typing and retyping manuscripts I threw away in frustration and disgust. In Bukowski's Post Office and Burning in Water, Drowning in Flame, and in Coleman's Mad Dog, Black Lady, and Imagos, I could see the maximum L.A., a violent, vast, indifferent L.A. that we'd experienced and survived. I couldn't see that city in my own slack sentences, but Bukowski and Coleman proved there was a there. I met Coleman and her husband Austin Strauss after college while I was writing poems that seeded my first book. They came to a reading I gave at the Southern California Library for Social Studies and Research on South Vermont. Wanda and Austin approached afterward and said they liked my work. They ran the Poetry Connection program on KPFK 90.7, the subscriber-supported Pacifica radio station. Would I care to feature as a guest? Weeks later, I did, and they were cordial and generous, and I was stiff with beginner's nerves. Famous for dynamic, performative readings, Wanda appeared intense and volatile, but I found her unfailingly supportive of younger writers. She got backlashed and blacklisted for daring to pen a book by Maya Angelou. Her columns for the now defunct LA Times magazine grated on some readers who sent complaining letters to the editor. Indeed, she could be stern and direct. In a letter to me, a copy of which somebody stuck in a glass case at a posthumous tribute at UCLA, she blasted one of my poems, instructing me to radically revise the whole thing. We crossed paths around town and read together at venues like the Midnight Special bookstore. For my second book, Wanda contributed a blurb for the back that struck me as both enthusiastic and sincere, and I finally felt my writing might stand on its own in LA's smoggy glare. The last time I saw Wanda was at the Boulder Motel where the Jack Kerouac School for Disembodied Poetics houses its summer instructors. Between that first KPFK radio show and our last chat in Boulder, Wanda had recommended me and many other poets for grants, publications, reading series, and gigs. But more than all that, Wanda represented all of us, poets and readers of Los Angeles, with fierce and revelatory honesty. Her husband, Austin, called in 2013 to inform me of Wanda's death. In her last years, exiled to the desert due to failing health and lack of institutional support, any kind of pension or any money, Wanda passed after an uncustomary silence. Her recent renewed national recognition in these current years, a kind of posthumous comeback, strikes me as both welcome and sad, indicative of the hard face LA showed its own major poet. All right. This thing, I guess, it's gonna do that. It's gonna turn off every time I ignore it. All right, whatever. It could do that if it wants to. Now, I just want to minimize this thing. Okay. Oh, I like this, right?
If you hit escape, I think, maybe? Like that?
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Louisa. All right. So about 10 years ago, or maybe less, the Smithsonian was undergoing some kind of diversification. So they set up an African American office, they set up a Latinx office, they set up an Asian American office to diversify themselves. They asked me and a bunch of other people to go out there and talk to them about that project. And afterwards, they asked me for a poem about, for an exhibit on Latinx Asian collaboration or communication. And I guess that's really the theme of this evening's talk. I want to talk about community and collaboration. It's a theme, obviously, in my work, and this poem addresses it specifically. When they asked for a poem on that theme, I didn't want to just give them a poem that was about Latinx Asian collaboration. I wanted to perform the collaboration with Arturo Romo, who did the videography for this video of that poem. So it appeared in their exhibit for a time. And the content is kind of self-explanatory. And there's sound later. There's sound in a minute. All the video is from the neighborhood of Boyle Heights. Some of the video is from the 1940s. Some of the video is from contemporary.
Raised in East L.A., shined shoes on Skid Row until the age of 10. At 12, he moved in with the Nakano family of Boyle Heights, where he learned Japanese. When the Nakanos were sent to camps in Arizona, Gabaldon joined the Marines at age 17 and used backstreet Japanese to capture 1,500 Japanese troops on Saipan. In the movie version, Gabaldon was played by white actor Jeffrey Hunter, who at age 42 suffered a stroke in 1969 and died falling down the stairs.
In the movie version, Skid Row was played by 1960s Bunker Hill, and age 12 was played by a grasshopper flying in a summer field. Sweetness careened down the streets in buses and trolleys.
In the movie version, A Boy Shining Shoes was played by Route 66, and relocation camps were played by cars passing by. Packards were played by Dodges.
In the movie version, Cold Beer was played by country music and nasal twang. Jeffrey Hunter was played by slight nausea and nostril flare. His headache was played by the 20th century.
In the movie version, Colors of the Rushing Ocean were played by the Whir stripped through the machine. And the sizzling palm leaves were played by Folded Taco Smell. Somebody was played by nobody.
In the movie version, the present is played by an off-camera past, with seagulls added or removed, and palm trees painted on a canvas backdrop of night. Popcorn smell is played by cotton candy.
In the movie version, wishes were played by voiceover of broken dishes, and bouts of influenza were played by magazines in the rack. A funnel of smoke over the hills was played by extras dressed like citizens.
In the movie version, East LA was played by the blood bursting an artery and dust specks thrown into a ray on the stairs, the golden moment bulking.
These were the people who were supposed to collaborate on my book.
They're still friends. Yeah. What do we have to say about them? Nothing. You know what? Yeah. I wrote a chapter for a book that was supposed to come out this year on Coffee House Press, and then the director of Coffee House Press just quit. That book is supposed to come out next year. We'll see. That's the way those things work. All right. Come on. No, it's not going to do it. Yeah. How about this? Slideshow. Oh. Okay. Up in the upper right-hand corner is like Arturo. He's waving to us, I think, saying, "I was almost there." So the piece that I'm going to read from the novel, it's not going to be too long, I hope, is part of the novel relates to a series of performance art pieces or performances that we did at colleges, museums, and cultural venues throughout Los Angeles, where in a magazine format we had, is there a picture of it here? No, there is not. Maybe there's one on the previous one. Oh, no, not really. Anyway, so we brought artists, community activists, and writers and others, and had a magazine-style interview program about community issues at these different venues, and then pretended that it was a radio program that was being broadcast, but the only people who heard it were the people in the audience. But one of the favored guests, the guests who always got the most attention and the most questions, was a guy that we ended up calling the Chicken Man, and he is Arturo's cousin, who found, I don't know how he found it, but he found some acreage on the side of a hill in East LA and had a farm there. So in the middle of the city, he had hogs, goats, geese, and ducks, and chickens, whatever could survive the coyotes and raccoons. And then all his family became vegetarian, except for him. And then he would sell that produce, the eggs and the animals at the farmers markets around LA. But he was totally way more popular than the rest of us on any of those. And so anyway, this chapter is basically related to urban farming, related to sustainable chicken in America. The United States was at war when we were growing up, as we came of age, during our young adulthood, throughout our lifetimes, and after we die. The wars will never stop. It's too late for that now, apparently. People don't mention it. Wasn't worth thinking about. The United States equals war. So, some wars, if you blinked, you missed them. Grenada, Panama. Of course, the industrial military complex conducts full-blown wars in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Those soldiers, privatized mercenaries, and civilian contractors don't want to work in KFC or Popeyes, frying chickens like Mexicanos, although they do eat mountains of chicken. Myself, I like to take 2 chickens, fryers, 5 or 6 pounds each, slice them from the neck through the breast cartilage down to the bottom, spread the rib cage apart, place them backside up on the cutting board, press down till the ribs crack. The chickens flatten about as flat as they can be. Rub both chickens with achiote paste, which you can cut with lemon juice and mashed garlic. Maybe liquefied butter, maybe chipotle powder, or red pepper flakes if you want to increase the heat. On the barbecue over semi-low coals, takes about an hour. You have 2 red, juicy, fiery chickens to serve your guests with side dishes. My friend Rick has a killer curry chicken recipe he cooks on a wok and serves over rice. So hot, it burns your mouth. Some people can't eat it. These days, I prefer my own barbecued chickens, which when flattened, cook all the way through without having to be turned over a bed of Mexican mesquite charcoal. They brown nice and crisp on top like that. After listening to a recent Rupture Radio Hour, which features guests like Chicano Moratorium organizer Chalio Munoz, I was especially intrigued by urban agriculturalist and chicken farmer Liki Renteria. What he said about raising poultry for personal needs in an urban setting was eye-opening and enlightening. On his rough estate on a slope in Happy Valley, adjacent to Eugene Debs Park, where it would seem his chickens have the run of many acres of urban green space, however fraught with raccoons and coyotes. Liki Renteria farms hundreds of heirloom variety pullets and cocks. Cuckoo marrons, salmon faveroles, speckled Sussex triplets, dark Cornish Plymouth barred rocks. Renteria, a favorite guest on the radio show for several reasons, answered many questions from the audience about raising your own organic food in an urban setting. I've been lucky to catch him on the radio lately on a couple episodes where he answered questions from the audience with alacrity and generosity. Audience members, seemingly a wide spectrum of East Side residents of all ages and genders, couldn't get enough, asking him about food pyramids, ethics, sustainable agriculture, legal issues, even questions about the effects of food on their personal relationships. I was impressed with all the information and began to believe it might be a good idea to purchase some big fat Rhode Islands for myself. Recently, Tina and I were at some industry, showbiz, lawyer's house in Laurel Canyon, a benefit for arts programs for children with AIDS. Tina told me I should go when somebody asked me to read some poems there. And even if I didn't want to, she was curious, and it was for a good cause. Even if it was going to take us an hour or more to get there across town in traffic, if there were no accidents. The usual bottleneck on the 110 through downtown to the 101. Bottleneck there too, breaking up a little bit by Alvarado to Highland, south on Hollywood, and due west on whatever it is. People driving so rude. Night falling, lights of the city coming in, the glittering chill, winking and twinkling as we drove up in the hills. Tina reread Google Map directions as I drove, rushed and gloomy. I don't care if I'm late, I sulked, but I drove fast. I tend to drive fast. Tina soothed me, we'll get there. I had to park a couple blocks away on a narrow, winding street hemmed in between tall walls, tall hedges, tall structures obscured by trees. I gave my name to a couple at the door who checked it against the list. The hostess, a TV actress, met us as we were walking in. She looked at me with wide eyes as if tentatively recognizing me as if based on somebody else's description. Thanked me for coming, telling me I was to follow the musician. That's your cue. Just let us know if you need anything. The program this evening is bursting, so please keep it under 3 minutes. Will that be satisfactory? Sure, I said. I won't go longer than 1 minute. I'd been staring at the actress, her face round and shining like the moon, thinking I'd seen that face before on TV and in the movies where it appeared normal-sized. She turned to other arrivals. We moved on through the crowd. What's her name? I asked Tina. Tina said she thought her name was something, and then she corrected herself, saying, but I'm probably wrong. I forgot the name a minute later. The party was all white, except for a few black people who apparently also worked in television or film. I recognized another actress who used to be Jackson Browne's girlfriend and who we used to see sometimes with him in downtown protest marches and demonstrations. She was in that terrific, famous science fiction movie academics love to reference when discussing the future of Los Angeles. People were dressed in clothes they might wear on TV and also in regular clothes, jeans, t-shirts, or whatever. Nobody was talking to us just yet. So we ambled through the living room where people milled with plates of food, drinks in hand. Man, I whined, when is that musician gonna play? They haven't even started the program yet. Maybe that musician will go on first, and then me, and we can get out of here. What does this guy do anyway to earn enough to buy this big house overlooking Hollywood? Tina told me he was a former communist in the 1960s, lawyer for the Black Panthers and other radical groups. Lately, he mostly did entertainment law, made lots of money and tried to give some of it back. I scanned the spines of books on the nearest bookshelves, social issues or political titles, nonfiction trade, hardcover books, Uneasy Rivals, Men and Women in Today's Workplace, The Long Walk to Freedom, the autobiography of Nelson Mandela. Easy reading, not all that interesting. Outside, there was a deck where caterers grilled imitation Thai chicken satay on skewers, where we stood in a short line and they set them on a bed of rice with Chinese chicken salad made from the same frozen cuts of white meat, I think. I handed Tina a plastic cup of sparkling spiders. As we pushed through knots of people glancing at us so coldly, their looks were almost openly hostile, out onto the hillside, laid out in the grassy open garden under the oak trees. This is nice. Very nice indeed, Tina said. I can't wait till I get the fuck out of here, I said. You gotta do your one good deed today, Tina said. I thought about that, walking around downtown here. They have these signs here that say, do your one good deed today. I tried to tear the satay off the bamboo skewer with my teeth without stabbing myself with the charred point. The meat sort of crumbled like charcoal in my mouth. This chicken is dry. I said, my favorite, Tina said. Yeah, right, I said. Tina said the gardens alone were worth the trip. I couldn't see it, but I said the gardens were nice to show that I could appreciate horticulture. It was a nice warm evening above the city. When she was finished with her food, I took her plate and we sauntered down the path that wound down the hillside. That one time I went to Leaky Renteria's farm in the hills of Happy Valley, following Jose's detailed instructions, without which I probably would have been lost somewhere, driving into some unfortunate alternate reality of sci-fi Los Angeles, never having the opportunity to join a UFO club of Greater East Los Angeles and miss out on ever finding my destiny. I went to the farm to kill chickens or roosters because the hens serve the purpose of laying eggs and don't need to be killed. But roosters just fuss and fight all the time. They harass and rape the hens, and they need to be killed. Because I'm a chicken eater and I eat chicken every week, I felt it's my duty to help Jose and Leaky cull their chickens. By the time I got there up on the hillside by the shed, they had the big pot heated to exactly 140 degrees or whatever the exact scientific temperature is for immersing dead chickens in extremely hot water so that their feathers slough off as easily as feathers fall out of a torn pillow. And Jose and Leaky were already at work, cutting the roosters' heads off, letting them bleed out in buckets, throwing the bodies in the big pot, it was immediately apparent on entering the area, releasing a stench of sticking chicken death, of scorched feathers, of bird blood, bird fear, punctuated now and then by the snapping off of yellow chicken feet, also tossed in a bucket, to be later thrown away because no one except Olga, the public defender, lawyer, only she wants to cook or eat. Leaky handed me an apron and a knife. There's gloves if you want them, he said. Leaky's chicken killing machine consists of a piece of plywood onto which he screwed a plastic orange traffic cone upside down. At this point, there was a wash of blood streaming down the plywood into the bucket where the heads end up. Is that an appropriate slide for that? No. There is no appropriate slide for that. All right. The cone made cutting the rooster's head off easy. You stuff the rooster head first down into the cone so that the head protrudes out the bottom. The rooster blinks, mouth open, wondering what the hell. They were so trusting. They lived their whole lives on this hillside fighting with each other, raping the hens, endless free food, safe in wire pens, once in a while menaced by raccoons or coyotes who dug underneath or climbed overhead. And now they're hanging upside down with their head sticking out of a traffic cone. What's that awful smell? Why is there blood on the board? They don't even try to peck at you. This is uncomfortable, you pulling on my head like this. You pull their neck out, stretch it for the knife, and just cut it off. The body flaps and kicks. Blood spurts out and drips down the bucket. Toss the head. After the body stops moving, pass it to Jose and Leaky, who are scorching the feathers and removing them. That's the dirty job. It leaves you smelling awful. That's why his family is vegetarian. All right. After the dark feathers are yanked out, that's not even in the text. I need to stick to the text. All right. After the dark feathers are yanked out, the outer feathers and the long-winged feathers and the under feathers with that stench of filth and death, pale goose-pimpled chicken skin reveals itself. And I'd never seen it before, but after the feathers come out of those same pores, the feathers come out of long filaments of pale mucus extrudes in spaghetti-like secretions. No wonder we like our chicken fried crispy. All right. So that's that. We didn't even get through these, huh? Is that the last one? No, not even. I'm gonna quickly go through these, I guess. At the chapter headings for each chapter, Arturo did these beautiful line drawing or beautiful pencil drawings that were kind of in the style of 1930s charcoal drawings. Yeah, so kind of anachronistic in their way, with the dirigible representing the obvious failures of the 20th century utopian hopes for all these social movements. And the book in general, one of the themes related to community is the rise and fall of these social movements. The fact that people sacrifice their lives to build these movements. Many of them remain unknown and unheralded, and then later generations come along, like Black Lives Movement, built on the previous hopes of the prior generations, and so forth. And so that the dirigible is obviously metaphorical and stands in haphazardly for that theme or aspect of the book. These were this was actually one part of the book that somebody else did. We finally did, elbow somebody else into contributing. There's a few little things like that in there. And then this is the part of the book that the printer who produced the book who went to the publisher and had them sign a waiver saying, this is on purpose. You can't send it back. Oh, but I could say that the aesthetics of Arturo's visuals in the book are based on the sort of primitive propaganda technologies of the social movements of the 20th century, so that like in the 60s and 70s, the Chicano movement, had mimeograph machines, which I know you don't know what that is, but it's like a Xerox machine, but worse. Comes out looking like this. This is like the propaganda that we got handed out when we were kids, like to foment revolution. Read that. That'll tell you how to do it. George Lopez. You guys know George Lopez, right? Now he has facial hair. I think the guy on the right relates to some kind of like sinus medication thing. So yeah, Arturo's visual imagery draws from many sources like street advertisements. In the front of these of East LA botanicas. Botanicas are herbal medicine, and kind of folk medicine stores. They will often have like not George Lopez, but they will have a saint like going around and around, or Jesus or something. So yeah, so we don't have Jesus, we have George Lopez. All right. And then the obvious failures of technology to get us out of the problems of today. So we start a year-long process of doing research to write the book and doing these performances and engaging in wandering the streets of East LA and finding arcane stuff. And one of the things that we found out was that in the 1920s, a Chicago businessman named William Powell, who was African American, came from Chicago to East LA to be trained as a pilot, because because he was African American, he found this one airport in East LA that would allow him to train as a pilot. And so he started the Bessie Coleman Aero Clubs based on a 1920s sort of martyr to the aerospace industry. Well, there was no aerospace industry. There were no airlines. You know, there was nothing like that. But William Powell thought that if he could get into the beginning of the aerospace industry in Los Angeles and started Bessie Coleman Aero Clubs to train African American men and women to get into the aerospace industry as it started, it could literally uplift them out of racism and oppression, you know, in the 1920s, 1930s. So he funded all of this through 5 gas stations that he owned. He started Black Wing's airplane company where they were going to make airplanes. He had a newsletter to broadcast his activities and to offer free scholarships to young Black men and women to learn how to be pilots. He brought James Banning out from the East Coast. James Banning was the first African American to fly coast to coast with another guy in a plane. He was the first commercially licensed Black pilot in the United States. I found out all this stuff just by wandering around East LA, and I had no idea that. So I had no idea that before we made up this fictional dirigible company, there was James Powell, Black Wings, and this cadre of young men and women who flew stunts as pilots before tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people on the east side of Los Angeles. And then indeed, James Banning ended up he died in a stunt crash and was buried in Evergreen Cemetery in East Los Angeles. And Arturo went and looked at his forgotten and unknown little tombstone. But we didn't make that up. We found out that before we started making stuff up, people were actually doing it. Yeah. Oh, is that it? Is that the end? Maybe that's the end. Okay, so I'm at the end. All right. I'm at the end. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you so much, Sesshu, and thank you all for coming. 12 p.m., Art Barn. Come and talk to Sesshu. I can attest after spending today with him, he's delightful to talk to and easy to talk to, so we can ask all of our questions there. So let's give him one more round of applause, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.